tremendously excited to be here today presenting about this topic because it's something that I learned about a few years back, and there were no photographs of it, and I was actually in the library in Rutgers and I found the photo up there at the top, and I was like, wow, finally a raceway photo. And then after that, suddenly like tons of them are on eBay and there's postcards and everything, and I'm like, they were always out there. But it was a park that was here for a very short time, and I'm going to get into the history of it. What you see at the bottom there is actually the clubhouse for the actual horse track that was also there at the same time. Kind of going to go through some of the things. I'm going to talk about how this was like a folly. I'm going to talk about the founders, the buildings involved, the stables, the crowds, and the Manahan Hotel, which is that building that was at the bottom. Also, horse races, bike races, accidents, foot races, other activities, and it was a youth hangout, because if you figure there wasn't a lot of things for young youth to do in those days. What a folly is somebody decides that they want to create something and they think it's a really good idea, and it ends up not really going well, and it ends kind of in a short time. This is one that was down in Williamsburg, Virginia. It was a President's Park where this artist created busts that were 22 feet high of all the presidents of the United States. And you could wander around and look at them very closely. It was kind of like Mount Rushmore up close. But then the financial crisis happened in 2008. The thing went bankrupt. They had to get rid of them, so they hired a guy to come and demolish them. And he couldn't do it because they were such cool works of art. He dragged them to this field down in Virginia, and now you can go down and see them sitting in the field. And that's what this picture is at the bottom of all the tattered, damaged heads that are sitting in this field. I went about 2 years ago, and it was really incredible. But that was a folly, something that was started that didn't work out. And as you see, the Middlesex County Driving Park is a similar one. This is another one that's down in the Washington, D.C. area. If you're driving down on the Beltway down in Washington, you will see where the Mormon temple is. To the left of there is this, the National Park Seminary, which was the school, and the makers of the school decided to have every building look different and have a different architectural style. And so it looked kind of like a big hodgepodge. And eventually the Army took it over and kind of had the thing decaying. But now a developer came in and fixed it up. So it's actually a folly that's been fixed. And so if you ever go down there, it's a fascinating thing to see. But that was something where someone thought it was a good idea and it didn't work out. This is our local folly, the racetrack. As you can see on the left, this is what was there originally. Most of what we're familiar is Pathmark and other types of development that were there in that area. And the only thing, it would only last 10 years. I mean, it's amazing. You think of it, the racetrack, it's like this amazing thing because other tracks last for a long time, but it was a very short period of time that it was there. The founders are very interesting guys. What I call them is, and I don't know if this is a true term that I've created myself. If it is, I want a patent on it. Geological millionaires, because what they were is they were farmers that came out here, bought land. A lot of them were in the peach growing business. And when the peach growing business failed, they suddenly looked in the ground, and like Jeb Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies, they found clay, sand, and other materials and then they started to mine that and made lots of money. The Whiteheads were involved with a lot of the building in Manhattan as well as in Newark. And then a lot of the bricks that were made in South River and Sayreville ended up everywhere. In fact, the college that I went to, American University in Washington, D.C., the history department had polished brick that came from South River. Oh. So you just never know where South River brick came from, or actually Old Bridge brick. The capital stock for this was $9,000, and Edward Whitehead was the president. Again, one of the Whiteheads. And Charles Manahan, who I'm going to talk about a little bit later, was a key figure in all this. He actually ended up as being a mayor for a short period of time of East Brunswick and appears in the East Brunswick mayor book that was written a few years back. Looking at these guys, this is what they had. The Furmans were another family that made their money from the ground, from bricks and also from soil. The Conger, and I'm going to give you an idea of what their backgrounds were. Furman was bricks and trolley. Fisher was from Sayer and Fisher. Edward Whitehead was from the Whitehead. Leonard Furman also from clay mining. And then Conger was actually the Sayer and Fisher bookkeeper. And then you had John Clark, who made his money from iron. Now Manahan made his money from wood. So all of them were geological millionaires. And that's really how they made their money. And some of the pictures, that photo in the center there is actually a caricature of Edward Whitehead that appeared in the newspaper years ago. And these other items are like different things associated with the founders of it. This is the track. It was a half-mile track called the liveliest track in the East. When it first came out, it was very popular. It was built by James Walsh of South Amboy. And the grandstand, which I've kind of zoomed in on here, that was the main area for the crowd that was there. Yeah, for 4,000 people could fit in there. And then you just see that little piece on the right-hand side, that's the judging stand. And most of the tracks had that kind of thing. And in the center there, I'm from Flemington, New Jersey. We had a racetrack there. In the center, there was always a lot of cars and activity in there. So you could stuff spectators in the middle of the track to observe it as well. There was a large, safe, and comfortable 12-box stalls. Stables were built at the southern end of the track of the property, near the clubhouse grounds. So this would be near Old Bridge Turnpike is where that would be. And so they had all these stables that were there. The crowds, one of the things at this time period, there weren't really cars, so you had a lot of trolleys that would get people there. And the trolley would come into Tanner's Corner. That was the main place. And then they would bring them by stage to the actual track. And if you look on the bottom here, that's what 25 cents was in those days. So that's what people would be paying to enter the park. And the large crowds witnessed many races there. And there were races that were both local races, and then there were also ones that were more important. A lot of the owners used it as their own personal track, and their horses were the key horses that were featured at the track. So it was kind of a vanity thing for them. This is what Tanner's Corner looked like in those days. So when the trolley came in there, that's what they would see. And where the Crestwood was, that's where that building right there, the house was there. The Tanner home was there. Elmira Tanner, that was her house originally. This is the Manahan Hotel, or the Middlesex Hotel. They had lots of different names it's called over the years. It was quite a spectacular place and quite a place for all types of activity, not just associated with the racetrack, but also just other types of, kind of entertainment. He planned this for several years. He was a real character, Manahan. I mean, he was a man that had a lot of money from the wood industry. He built this, cost him a lot of money, $10,000. And he built it using the Van Zandt brothers of South River. They were the people that built the building. Some of the things involving there was very popular for both racing crowds, and it was a very lively premise, that had spirits and food. And the Columbia Cornet Band was the group that played there, and that was a local band. And he had one of the big features, he had his own telephone. I mean, it's amazing when you think about how a payphone was like a feature for something. Today, everybody's got a phone on them, but back then, that was a very important thing. And so one of the things I was going to read for you, this is actually my book, which is called Victorian Housewife Rebellion, which is about my great-grandmother. And I have a page in here about the Manahan Hotel. And it's, Mr. Armstrong was hired yesterday by Edward Whitehead to drive a sleigh to the Manahan Hotel across from the Middlesex Driving Park after his coachman became ill. There were 16 people on the sleigh, including Edward Whitehead and James Fee. After confirming that they were the first sleigh to visit the house this winter, Fee demanded wine to be served to everyone. Manahan resisted at first, but then Fee and Eberwine took over the bar. Mr. Armstrong said Manahan laughed and didn't seem to mind, and he drank with the men. Mr. Armstrong would have joined them, but if he's not working. Men have vulgar habits. That's why the 10 nights in a bar room and what I saw there has become a bestseller, and prohibition will someday be the law of the land. Mr. Armstrong said they all wished Manahan a Merry Christmas before leaving and to rejoice. I am sure that the wives were thrilled when they returned home. So anyway, that's the Manahan Hotel. So it was more than just the park. It was a destination for all different types of activities. This is what's there now, this ugly building. This is the unfortunate thing of our history here, is ugly buildings replace nice buildings. The horse racing itself, and it was it's great that we got this trophy here, because this adds to the kind of the whole air of everything that went on there. Trotting was very big. It was outstanding trotty and pacing track. There were 3 races in each heat, with competitors trying to win the best 2 out of 3 of those. And the owners of the park used the track again as their vanity, and they'd have a lot of their horses there and they'd have friendly rivalries between, different geological millionaires trying to, and betting. And one of the things in this environment was the state was getting much more and more unhappy about gambling. So that's kind of the atmosphere that's going on with all of this as well. This is the Lattimore incident. This was an incident where it was in the newspaper. Supposedly John Whitehead, who was the brother of Edward Whitehead, was angry that his horse had done bad because he lost $900, and supposedly was rumored to have shot his horse in the stable after the race. Now, this has not been confirmed. It could have just been fake news. We don't know, but this was one of the stories that did appear. Now, bicycle races is a big deal, and one of the things that we don't really realize is the bicycle was like the iPad of the 1890s. I mean, it was something that was really a big thing for people to have, and it was a real status symbol. And if you got a bike, you were like really important. And so they started having these bike races, which also popularized biking even more for people. Sometimes they were included with the horse races as well. It started in 1893. Serious well-known bikers and wheelmen from the state would come down and race. And there was like thousands of spectators. The newspaper accounts stressed the splendid condition of the track. So for biking as well as horse racing, the track was kept in a very good condition, and the bikers enjoyed racing there. And a lot of the key figures that they're mentioned here, like Charles Morris, George Voorhees, and J.B. Bills, I guess they were very popular bikers at the time. And some of these bikes you can see, there were different varieties that they would have. A lot of the things, originally they were like the big-wheeled bikes, and by the 1890s it had developed into the two-wheel bike. And my family actually, before they started the Pontiac car dealership, they actually sold bicycles on Main Street in South River. So bike racing prizes, these are some of the prizes that were out there, and I've tried to kind of show different things that people would win. You could get a revolver, you could get a bike, you could get shaving equipment, lamps, different types of gold things and chains, even little silver, things that you could use in your kitchen. So these are all different types of prizes that would be given for various races that were done for bike racing. And this also went for horse races as well. Accidents, of course, one of the things that happens in every track is accidents. When I lived out in Flemington, they used to call it Crashington or something, because there was always accidents happening at the Flemington Speedway. And people would always be kind of talking about the different accidents that occurred. In this case, there was a case where a guy, a freehold biker, flipped his bike and went over the handlebars and hit his head. And they actually brought him to the Manahan Hotel to try to take care of him. I tried to track to see what happened to him, but I never was able to find any follow-up, but he definitely had a bad head injury. So these are the days before helmets or anything like that. So if you had a bad bike accident, it could be quite serious, as well as horse racing accidents as well. Shooting matches also occurred here. This is a time when people had a lot of guns. Everybody had their own rifle and pistol, and they would come out, and a lot of it was for shooting of live pigeons. That was the big thing. They would release the pigeons, and then people would then shoot them. And many of the pigeons would get loose, and so the local kids would sit outside the track and would shoot the pigeons. So I'm sure this wasn't the best environment with, a bunch of teenagers shooting pigeons around, but that's kind of what happened, and a lot of them would bring home the birds. This was also a time where people had no regard for birds. I remember reading different accounts where people would go down to the shore and they would come back with hundreds of birds that they killed. And, and it was a time where wildlife was not preserved, and nobody really had any kind of restriction. They thought it was unlimited resource that was out there. Foot races, another important part. There were different rivalries between people, like this one between William F. and Edley Jones. The prizes were gold medals for the foot races. And so again, it was another attraction for people to come. They even had potato sack races, and most of the races did not involve women, but at least the potato sack races gave women a chance to do their thing. And these were more for like local type things. These were not, like major prizes. Other activities included auctions, horse auctions. They had horse and mule and wagon harnesses sold there. It was constantly used by trainers. People would come there and train their horses. And then they actually had organizations like the New Jersey State Horse Breeders Association came there and had their meeting. And so this was kind of an exciting thing for the owners to have that as well. It was a youth hangout. As I mentioned before, there was not a lot for young boys to do in town, and there was a big problem at this time of kids that were truant from school and not, and kind of being loitering around. So this gave a good place where they could go. It was a popular rendezvous. They oftentimes, like typical kids would do, they'd find ways to get over the fence and not pay. And the thing that was always said is that a lot of the kids that were these ones hanging out became the leaders of South River, whether they were banking leaders or mayors or other politicians later on. So they all started out at the track. Weather problems happened as well, as we're all always aware of different weather, how that can affect things. They had a hurricane blew through in 1893 and did a lot of damage to it, $500 worth of damage, and they had to rebuild it. And this, was definitely a big setback for the organization. They started to have attendance problems fairly quickly with the track. By 1895, the numbers had dropped off. I guess the novelty of it had kind of ceased a little bit, and the owners started to get very concerned because the financial money was not coming in. And of course, with quarters, you need a lot of quarters to pay for things. Then you got legal problems. People started to say, the bird thing is getting crazy here. You can't be, killing all these live pigeons and other birds. And then the gambling, there was a big force about stopping gambling, and the anti-gambling is what really killed the park ultimately, because if people couldn't gamble, it really kind of lost its whole mission. The financial problems continued going on. They couldn't break even. It's interesting that this particular thing over here is from 1897, because that's when things were really starting to get bad, and they actually sold the park to Charles Whitehead, who was actually the father of Edward Whitehead. And then he ultimately sold it to Levinson, Jacob Levinson. And Jacob Levinson's a very interesting guy. Before they had banks in the area, he was the bank. He was a entrepreneur that had money, and he would lend it out to people. And eventually, when they did start the banks, he was one of the first people that was one of the key stakeholders of the different banks in the area. So this is actually his monument on the left, on the right over there. He ended up purchasing it for a while and holding on to it. And then the property went into neglect. Now, these photos are not of the park. These are ones I've taken of other parks, just to give you an idea of what it must have looked like when it started to be deserted. And what they started to use it for was, selling what was there, the soil, because it was good soil that they had nurtured over the years. And the one speedy track began covered with weeds, and the buildings were never repaired. So they ended up just falling apart, and eventually, they had to come down. The Manahan Hotel, though, survived. It outlived the park. Manahan finally built a house on Main Street. And then Manahan had a really sad kind of outcome in his life. There's two theories on it. Either he was a raging alcoholic or he had mental problems. But he ended up being, committed to the mental hospital in 1908, and eventually stayed in. He went kind of back out of the hospital, I think, in 1920, and then back in there and died there in 1927. I actually went and found the record of his when he was committed. It's actually in the legal records in New Brunswick. The hotel later had different owners, Albert Pingle and Edward Mott, and then eventually, when it was in 1919, it burned. It was a terrible fire, and the whole building burned down to the ground, and it was gone. Today, of course, you go here, and it's just not what it used to be. It's all developed. They eventually built houses in the one portion of it. It's a lot of houses, I guess, in the 1920s and 30s. And then, of course, the commercial real estate of the Pathmark and other types of things on Route 18. It's just hard to imagine that Route 18 severs what was the center of the park at one point. And that is the end of the presentation.